begin right now. First of all, I would like to thank you all so much for coming on a night that the library is usually closed on a Tuesday during the summertime. This far exceeded my expectations of the turnout, so I'm very glad to see all of you. Just to introduce myself, my name is Nadine Sergeyev. I am the Special Collections Librarian here at the library. It's a very exciting time here at this institution because, as many of you might have heard, we received a very generous grant from the Carnegie Corporation of New York last year. It's a 2-year grant, and it's enabling us to bring some of our historical collections to you. How this works is that it's a 2-part grant. So there's a digitization component, and then there's a family literacy part as well. So we began by focusing on 2 themes, the Great Migration and the Latino immigration experience into Newark. And we've gone through our collections in the Charles F. Cummings New Jersey Information Center and the New Jersey Hispanic Research Information Center. And there's a little mini flyer over by the TV monitor where the interview with Tiny Prince is playing that provides you with the URL to our digital collections. We only began in February, and we've made quite a bit of progress. So it's digital.npl.org, where you'll find African American newspapers, photographs, papers, maps, and much, much more. And we still have another year to go, so a lot more will be added in the meantime. And then the other half of the project has been educational outreach. So we hired somebody who's both a teacher and a librarian to visit schools and organizations and to provide lesson plans and activities with the children. What you see here is an exhibit which was donated to our New Jersey Information Center. This is only a partial, can you hear me? Partial
Yes.
example of the collection. The problem was a lot of the photographs were unidentified. Most of them had names. You will see some captions and photos of unidentified people. I included those in the exhibit because they provided a context to the bigger themes that I wanted to show. So while Tiny Prince was really known for his nightlife publications and his involvement in that scene, this shows various facets of African American life here in Newark and Orange and surrounding towns in the second half of the 20th century. Also on this sheet, you'll find information that we're very interested in your photos as well. So while we've been including our collections, there's also a section for community contributions. And to date, we've gotten some really beautiful historic family photographs from people in Newark. So if you're interested in doing that, you just agree to have us scan and put them online for everybody to see. And it's a historic record for future generations here in Newark and beyond. I just wanted to thank all the staff that have been so beneficial in moving this project forward. We still have a lot to do, but we've accomplished a lot already. I wanted to thank the Carnegie Corporation who's allowed us to do this project, and to all the panelists who came tonight, and to all of you who support the library and come to our programs. I would now like to hand it over to Guy Sterling, who many of you know as historian, author, and former Star-Ledger reporter. I am most thankful to Guy because I reached out to him and he went about and organized this entire panel here and the music as well. So very thankful to him. Thank you.
Okay, so as Nadine said, my name is Guy Sterling. I'm a retired Star-Ledger reporter and also a longtime resident of Newark. I live right around the corner on James Street, and I've spent a lot of time in the library here researching almost every facet of Newark's history. Rarely a day goes by when I'm not looking into something having to do with Newark's past, going back 351 years now. But this particular project is particularly dear to me because, like many of you in the room, I knew Tiny, and I recognized very early on, after meeting him, exactly the service that he was providing here, what he was doing, and it was very important the work that he was doing on behalf of the community. And so when he died a couple years ago, it just seemed only natural that his archives would come here to the library for scholars and students and authors and really anyone to come and to access, because it's a vast collection and it covers a very long period of time in Newark's history. And it was put together by really a man who was an icon here. So with that, I'm going to introduce our panelists tonight, and then I'm going to provide a short overview of the time period that we're talking about, and then we'll get into questions. What I'd also like to do, if you notice, there are microphones at the front of the room and about midway back in this center aisle. And I'd like for this discussion to be as interactive as possible. I know there are people here who, certainly knew Tiny, knew him better than I did. Perhaps, were in some of his magazines or worked for some of his magazines, or not quite, in different capacities. At some time during the discussion, if you feel that you would like to add a comment, just raise your hand and come up to the microphone. As you can see, this discussion is being taped tonight. It will go into the library's archives. And what we're really trying to do here is to get as broad a scope as possible about this man's life, because we're going to be here for an hour, maybe a little longer, don't know in that time frame, but this man had so many facets to his life that we might not be able to get to all of them, and our panelists may not be able to touch upon all of them. So feel free to participate in this discussion, and if you have a story to tell, a memory about Tiny, and somehow, in some way that he touched your life, please feel welcome to come up to the microphone and to share it with all of us. So with that, let me introduce our panelists. To my immediate left is Carletta Brinson Mitchell, who is Tiny's oldest living daughter and one of his 4 children who is still alive. Please welcome her, and I believe there may be 1 or 2 other members of the family here as well. Are there?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Would you stand, please? Other members of Tiny's family? Thank you. Thank you so much for coming and being part of this. To Carletta's left is Barbara Thompson. Barbara is a native of Newark, a graduate of the Charlton Street School and Essex County Vocational and Technical High School for Girls on North 13th Street, where she first thought she might want to be a dietitian. But soon she realized she had a love of business machines and became a typesetter instead, spending her entire career in the printing field. She worked for New Jersey Bell, a printing company, and for many years a consulting engineering firm on Elizabeth Avenue. It was as a typesetter that Miss Thompson met Tiny in 1959, and she went to work for him in a part-time capacity the following year, typesetting after hours. Around 1970, she left Tiny to start her own magazine in Newark, a glossy entitled New View. That's N-U-E, V-U-E. But it survived only a year, and she returned to Tiny in 1971, was his creative editor, and worked putting out the Black Mirror for 16 years. She also wrote for the magazines under the pseudonym BJ. Barbara describes Tiny Prince as, quote, a man for all people, and has wonderful memories of him. We're so happy to have her here tonight to share her recollections. Please welcome Miss Barbara Thompson. Next to Barbara is Leo Johnson. Leo is a native of Florida who came to Newark in the late 50s before joining the service and becoming a member of the United States Air Force Band in Europe. After his tour of duty ended, he returned to Newark and has been a mainstay on the local jazz scene here ever since. At one point, he was Little Jimmy Scott's musical director, and he also toured Europe with Rhoda Scott. In recent years, he was the musical director of the Newark Jazz Elders. Leo has a bachelor's and a master's degree in music from Rutgers, and he's also released 2 of his own CDs. Please welcome Leo Johnson, who provided our music tonight at the reception. Sharpe James is another native of Florida, having been born in Jacksonville, but came to Newark as an infant and is still here. He has the distinction of being Newark's longest-serving mayor, serving 5 4-year terms. Before that, he was a city councilman. Please welcome a man who has spent most of his adult life in the public eye and really needs no introduction, Sharpe James, my friend. We're here tonight to talk about nightlife in Newark from the 1950s through the 1970s, with a special emphasis on Carl Brinson, AKA Tiny Prince, who chronicled the after-hours scene in the city with his publications for more than a half-century. Before we hear from our panelists, I'd just like to give a quick overview of nightlife in the era we'll be focusing on. I don't think it's a stretch to say that the cultural offerings outside the home hit their peak in the 30-year stretch from 1950 to 1980, not just in Newark, but throughout the entire country. In the early years of that era, television was something new and untested, so people mostly still went out for their fun and entertainment, be it to the movies, the concert halls, the nightclubs, the restaurants and bars, or wherever they could congregate to socialize and have a good time, to celebrate a birthday, toast a job promotion, gather with the family, and the like. The age of live theater in Newark, once so thriving, was all but gone by the time World War II had ended. But the big 5 movie theaters in downtown Newark, the Adams, Branford, Lowe's, Proctor's, and Paramount, along with some of the neighborhood movie houses, were all up and running and seemingly prospering. In 1958, for example, the Paramount showed Bridge on the River Kwai, and the Adams showed Around the World in 80 Days, with each theater selling advanced tickets for reserved seats to those films with a limit of 4. That, of course, would all change as TV grew in popularity, and by the end of the 70s, admission at these same movie theaters was merely $1. The Empire Burlesque Theater on Washington Street was also open for business during some of this era. And for a 4-year stretch in the late 50s, Minsky's, the famous Minsky's Burlesque, left New York and took up residence at the Adams Theater on Branford Place. Some of the movie houses also offered occasional live music, but the Mosque, which changed its name to Symphony Hall in 1964, was pretty much the place to go and hear top-notch music of all kinds. The Griffith Music Foundation continued sponsoring the best in classical music right up through 1958, when promoter Mo Septi stepped in and filled the void after Mrs. Griffith and her husband died. Septi was savvy enough to begin adding pop and rock shows to Symphony Hall's roster of events as tastes changed with the times in the early 60s and the baby boom generation began to come of age. By the mid and late 60s, the well-known promoter Cedric Kushner had moved in to take over the rock and roll scene at Symphony Hall for several years, bringing in the likes of Jimi Hendrix, for his only appearance in New Jersey, by the way, as part of the Jimi Hendrix Experience, his own band, the Rolling Stones, the Beach Boys, The Who, Sly and the Family Stone, and numerous others to the Broad Street venue. The Old Newark Armory also hosted some big shows. I saw an ad for one show in November of 1952 that starred Jerry Lewis and Dean Martin. Another one on May 10th, 1958, brought Alan Freed, the Cleveland DJ who termed the coin rock and roll to Newark with a review of 17 musical acts. That must have been a great show. Was anybody here at that show, by the way? I'd love to talk to you at some point. Alan Freed's show at the Newark Armory in 1958. In the same year, promoter Teddy Powell, who lived in Newark and had a couple of nightclubs here, was regularly promoting R&B, soul, and blues concerts in the city. One of those who cut his teeth in the entertainment business here in Newark under Teddy Powell was Clarence Avant, known today as the godfather of soul music. Are we familiar with Clarence Avant? Yeah, okay. Big name in music. Still alive. All along, jazz remained a constant, carrying over its popularity from the 20s and 30s. You could find it at the Mosque or Symphony Hall, and you could find it in the clubs. In my random survey of newspapers last week, I saw an ad for a show at the Mosque with a band, one band, that featured Ella Fitzgerald, Buddy Rich, Lester Young, Roy Eldridge, Barney Kessel, and Hank Jones, along with, on the same bill, the Oscar Peterson Trio and the Gene Krupa Trio, all on the same bill one night at the Mosque Theater in September 1952. Talk about getting your money's worth. In the mid-50s, the Mosque also hosted Art Ford's Jazz Party, the greatest jazz program ever aired on TV. Guests included Billie Holiday, Coleman Hawkins, and Willie the Lion Smith. The clubs, of course, were the best place for live music. I well remember the many stories my good friend, the late jazz historian from Newark, Stan Myers, used to tell me about how there was so much music in Newark at one time that you could walk down the street and literally have your pick of places to find what you liked. We'll talk about some of those places tonight. But my point in all this is that Newark was a great place to be out at night in the middle part of the 20th century because there was so much going on. And chances are, if you were out and about, at some point you were going to run into Tiny Prince, who moved from one world to the next so seamlessly, so gracefully, and so tastefully, or run into one of his photographers, maybe at more than one spot. Essentially, what Tiny Prince did was to cover for a large and emerging segment of Newark's population the news and local tidbits, whether the subject was politics, entertainment, Newark government, or celebrities. Items these readers weren't going to find printed anywhere else. His publications were produced and written locally. They were free. They were everywhere. They were jam-packed with information, ads, and columns. And they were a must-read, most especially in Newark's black community. So in a very real sense, Tiny Prince performed a public service by providing another voice in the public discourse with his magazines, Trend, After Hours, and the Black Mirror News, a voice that really otherwise would not have been heard. Simply put, he got the news out without fail, week after week, month after month, year after year, decade after decade. It could not always have been easy, as anyone familiar with the intricacies of publishing can attest. I don't think I'm taking too much of a liberty here tonight in saying we're all very grateful that his archives have come home to where they belong, the Newark Public Library, where scholars, students, authors, and really everyone can have access to them for years to come. Tiny's photos, his many photos, hundreds of photos, his magazines, and his belongings, did you see his suit of clothes out here off to the right, are as special and unique as his life was. He was truly a Newarker and one of a kind. As Barbara Thompson told me last week when we spoke, Tiny was a man for all people. Now his collection is here for all people to see and study. With that, I want to thank Nadine for her work on this project, thank the library for hosting this event tonight, and thank everyone for coming. Let's begin our discussion. So, the first thing I'd like to do is perhaps settle the story of how Tiny got his nickname, because I've heard at least two versions of it, and there may be as many versions as there are people. So we have his daughter, and we have Barbara Thompson, who worked for him for many years. Could you each tell us how Tiny got his nickname? Please speak up into that microphone.
Okay, this is a story I got from him, that he was so small when he was a kid that the plumbers would use him to get under the sink and into the wall to do with the wrenches and things like that, and that's how he was nicknamed Tiny, because he could crawl in those little spaces back in the old, the old days where it was like walled up and you had to get to the pipes like that. That's what I heard. Now, I don't know what you may have heard.
Okay. Carletta?
Okay.
My father had a small stature. He's very small and petite. And they started calling him Tiny very early. When he used to love to dance as a teenager. And they started calling him Tiny Prince because he was such a great dancer. And that's where I felt he got the name Tiny Prince.
I'd go with your story.
Are there any other stories out there? Okay. Well, the one thing I remember about Tiny that he told me when I would speak with him, he'd always say, if you're ever going to write about me, please mention that I was a Lindy Hopper. We know what Lindy Hopper means. Tiny was a great dancer, and he would go to New York, he told me, all the time, and would just dance the night away. I think the scene was more in New York than it was here in Newark, but that was one of his favorite trips, and he was very, very proud. Now, in this day and age, dancing doesn't seem to be as popular as it was back then, but he very much wanted it to be known he was a Lindy Hopper. So, Tiny, the word is out tonight. You were a Lindy Hopper.
Right.
I want to go to the far end of the table and ask Mayor James. Now, you knew Tiny Prince for many years. Tiny was not just a publisher, but he worked in a lot of different circles, including political. Tell us a little bit about your dealings with Tiny over the years, and he obviously worked for the city for many years. But when did you first come upon Tiny, and what were your dealings with him?
Well, if you wanted to get reelected, you look for Tiny Prince. Here was someone who made you come up and not down. Too many people in the world tell you what you want to hear to make you feel good. Tiny, to me, created a culture in our city that we should be proud of, especially when we see young people today walking around showing their Fruit of the Loom drawers and not recognizing pride. I think Tiny taught Calvin West how to dress. He taught Alva Lofton how to dress, George Richardson, because they were people that we looked and we admired. Not only that, but they always had a party. Boy, if you want a party, that you go to the house party. Information, resource, and knowing everyone. He was a resource of knowledge. Guy, it's interesting. All too often we appreciate people after they leave here, and you hear people like McNaughton of Prudential say, Sharpe, man, a city is more than mortar and bricks. A city is more than just work hours, 9 to 5. There's got to be an after-hour life. Tiny taught us that there was something more in our city about enjoyment, about fun, about laughing, about smiling, about going out. And there's nothing wrong with that. I went to the editor of the Star Ledger, Mort Pye, and I said, Mort, everything you write is negative about Newark. When are you going to write something good? And he said, well, Sharpe, you don't understand our business. I said, well, what's your business? He said, we print plane crashes, not plane landings. Aren't we happy that we had a Tiny Prince who would print some plane landings and give us hope and inspiration to go out and be ourselves. Folks, we got to do more than just work every day of our life.
That's very good.
Barbara, tell us about when you first came upon Tiny and how you went to work for him.
That's tough. He had that after-hour news, and most of us were working. I think he had a little shop up on West Market Street, and he heard I had a Veritype machine. And so he called me up, and I started doing these columns. And there's a picture over there in the exhibit of how he used to write his columns. They were like puzzles, you know, on the side, little notations on the side, and then insert this and all this business like that. And I didn't really know him, but, you know, it was a certain loyalty that he brought out of you, that you got the paper out, you got it out on time, you did the typesetting and so on and so forth. And from there, I moved into the office part-time, and we just started going from there. We'd be up all the week, and finally the paper would get printed on Saturday morning and be distributed on Saturday night to all the clubs.
And it was not an insignificant magazine in size. It was 40
pages every week.
And tell us what those 40 pages were filled with.
The politics had to be in there. And sometimes it would be signed, I have a byline, and sometimes it wouldn't, according to who we wanted to get, you know, that particular thing. And then you had the bartenders would write, give them tidbits, and people would write columns. And eventually he lifted up a lot of people that you'd read about in the paper. When you walked into a bar and you'd say, "Oh, that's George Richardson. That's what he looks like." They were like celebrities. 4 People magazine. When you went locally, he made a lot of little mini stars. Abe Tillman, people of that nature. Some of the politicians. You know that, Sharpe. Right.
Stay close to Tiny. Go ahead.
Right. He always picked people and said, "You can do this. You want to sell ads? Here, go. Sell the ads. Here, you know, you make a commission, bring the ads to me." And he made a lot of people that went on to other things.
He made a Ken Gibson known to all of Newark.
Yes, exactly.
Like that. His activities, picnics and everything involved, even before then. But he would bring out people that the Ledger and other newspaper guy, I don't mean to offend you, Star Ledger, that the Ledger just simply would not cover.
Right.
And by the way, the clubs didn't serve food. Just like you go to a good restaurant, those clubs always had a good kitchen. Don't you remember?
Exactly.
Shrimp night,
the Bridge
chicken
Club,
night.
The Bridge Club with the fish, you know? And every bar seemed to have a crab night. So you did that. You went to work, you came home, you went out, you went to whoever was having Club Vanity crab night. You went and ate crabs out of newspapers and sat there and bought a beer and stuff. And you did that, got up and went to work the next day.
Carletta, could you give us some idea as to how Tiny came to publishing?
Well, my father always liked publication, and he had worked for the Amsterdam News and a couple of other newspapers back in the day. And then he decided that this is something that he wanted to do, and he started his own magazine. And I was remembering as a child, we used to he'd print the magazine and he'd bring it home, and we would collace it, get them together, staple them, and get them ready for to be distributed. And this is how we made extra money, me and my sisters. So it was a very interesting time during our lives.
It must have been, putting out a weekly magazine when, as essentially a part-time endeavor, must have really been taxing on his time.
Yes, well, he was all over. Yeah. He did, he really did. This is something he always wanted to do, and when he finally got the opportunity to do it, this is what he did. He got his magazine, and that's what we used to do.
Okay. Did he involve the children in the magazine business in any other way?
Yes, he was always trying to encourage us to write articles and different things like that. I don't believe any of my sisters or brothers did any of that, but he tried to encourage us to get involved.
Right. Barbara, give us some idea how the magazine generated revenue. How would, I mean, it was a free magazine, so he's bringing it around to all the clubs. I remember seeing it many times. You'd walk into the clubs, and to be fair, you know, After Hours and the Black Mirror News were not the only magazines of their type in Newark. There was also Nightlife and Stuff, if you remember. They were, you know, put out by people other than Tiny. But give us some idea as to how the, you know, the revenue picture worked.
Simply by ads. The little $8 for the quarter page. I think a full page was $50 or something. And they would also collect, like a weekly thing, go in and deliver the papers and collect the money for your ad that week. The Key Club, all those clubs took out ads. And then towards the more coming up, towards the as the years went by, you started getting the full page ads from some of the major car dealers and things of that, because they began to see the circulation that we had. And that mostly the revenue came from ads.
And he had a whole network of people who were out there selling ads for him.
Right. The bartenders, you know, you could get a commission if you sold an ad. And it's good money on the side before the 1099s came into play. You know? This is how, and every week we would produce it. And the loyalty that we had to him and his drive is just amazing that we did it. We'd be up all night sometimes. And then we had the guys that come in on Friday night who worked for a printing company downtown, two brothers, and would go up to his printing press and work all night and have the paper ready for Saturday. And again, collating. Sometimes we'd go up and help collate and staple. It would be wet leaving the leaving the place, but he was so adamant about getting the paper. He was an old newspaper man.
He was.
Yeah.
And these people who worked for him, they were all, as you told me the other day, they were, you called them stringers, freelancers. These were not full-time employees.
No.
So how many stringers could he have at one time?
At least 10.
10.
That's being modest. There were people out in Patterson who had that area.
Okay.
Elizabeth, they covered that. And these people wrote who didn't even know they could write, would write columns, and he'd get them in and fix them up a little bit. And I said to someone out there, we'd have this anonymous guy who would write, The Shadow. And he wouldn't name names, but you knew who he was talking about. You know, Dish in the Dirt, Hope It Don't Hurt. That was a very popular column. We ran that on the page just before the inside back cover. The Shadow. People loved it. And then Politics would sometimes be veiled references to things going on. I remember when John Corzine was running. Tiny ran streamers on the bottom of the page. John Corzine for governor. Do everything. I had to typeset all this stuff. I didn't even know who that was. And, you know, the man became our governor. He's a very, very smart, not necessarily book smart, but he had that, but just a street community smart guy.
And what was the decision-making process for who got to be on the cover of the magazine?
A lot of times people would like, if a bartender was having a big birthday party, he'd buy the cover. So, you know, you get that information about what they want and everything. And then we'd run the pictures, and then we'd go back and cover the party. Then pictures would be run in the next issue. That was a good way to do it. And then a lot of times it was what was going on.
Any politicians ever buy that cover?
Oh, yeah.
Come on, really? Come on now.
No,
Hey.
no.
That's my next question, sir. How many covers did you buy?
In the beginning, and first of all, what a love of labor. You have to love what you're doing, love the community, love the people, because It's a struggle when you deal with the bars and everybody else. But later on, the politicians recognize this is a popular outlet in the community.
Right.
If you want to be seen, you want your name out there, you go get advertised, and Tiny was the man to put you out there.
Right.
When he wasn't in his office, he was sitting in the Robert Street Hotel.
Yeah.
Like, I thought that was his office sometimes. He was always in the lobby. He knew where you were going to be. He was always present and visible. But what we got to understand, here was Labor Love. He wasn't really concerned about, will I make money? Will I be the best? He wanted to do this as a service to the community.
Yes.
And we should recognize and appreciate how many dreams people have, and they say, do you have any money? How much I get paid? I got to make money. He, at risk, started this dream and never lost that dream for doing this and giving this information. We have to love this guy.
Yeah.
Love
Absolutely.
this guy.
Barbara, what would a normal press run be?
Oh, gosh. Well, we used to fit, it was never 10,000 copies going out, but, our contract said that. We just, how many ads did we have? We used to put, 500, 300 magazines in the different places. It's according to what sizes the outlets were.
Right.
But,
and I remember one of the other columnists who I saw writing for the magazine was Joe Thomas, the saxophone player. Joe used to write a
the
column.
Jazz column.
Wrote a jazz column that was really, really well done. Speaking of jazz, Leo Johnson, who's trying to fall asleep over there, we're going to bring into the conversation.
Right.
So you knew Tiny Prince. You saw him out at the clubs. He just wasn't. I'm going to ask Carletta this in a moment, but Tiny just wasn't a lover of jazz. He knew jazz artists. He was close with Sarah Vaughan. Tell us your interactions with Tiny Prince over the years, because you had to have seen him in all the clubs.
I just think he was a beautiful person. He was a very nice man. He was a gentleman. I can remember before I had an automobile, and wherever I was going, I'd hear a horn honk, and he would pick you up, give you a ride, whatever. And whatever the music was that was playing in his car, I remember he got me once. He had the music on. He said, "Who is that?" And this was during the era when the Brazilian music was very popular. And of course, Carlos Jobim, and how insensitive was playing, and I didn't recognize the artist, and he said, "That's Cannonball Adderley," and that kind of
Rhoda Scott coming to the Peppermint Lounge, remember, on Central Avenue. Sarah Vaughan coming home to Symphony Hall, and when Duke Ellington came to Newark and played Symphony Hall, he said, in his bio, he called the band backstage and said, "Tonight play good. Now, Newark knows good music." That's what's the respect for Newark. It's community. It's talent of those who come from our community and so forth.
Well, actually, Tiny, as he said before, during that time, in reference to the Robert Treat, I think they had something they called the Brass Rail or something, and they were doing jazz, and then you could find him there every week. But he never. They just sit there and observe and absorb the music, I would say. I didn't have that. We never talked a lot, but his presence was it just resonated all over the place.
It's true.
Yeah, just his presence, and you could feel the warmth. You could feel that if you look, you could feel that he was just a nice person.
In anticipation of tonight's program, I got a letter from a Tiny son, Carlton, who lives in Florida, and unfortunately was not able to make it. But I'm going to share a little bit of his letter about his father, if you'll indulge me for a moment. This is how he described Tiny: strict no-nonsense, often charming, funny, people-smart character who always reminded me a little bit of the 1940s actor Mickey Rooney from the Andy Hardy movies, a little Sammy Davis Jr., and most recently the actor Terrence Howard in TV's Empire. He was sometimes distant, always on the go, and zealous in trying to help people of color from what he felt was the injustice of life. He loved the nightlife, yet he never drank nor smoked. He always dressed in trendy clothes and always said, "Carl," meaning Carlton, "it's important to be a well-groomed cat." He stressed to me the importance of standing in my own truth, staying humble, keeping my word, being kind and generous to others, and that education, the written word, and faith would be essential to being a valuable citizen and a respected man. Now, picking up on what the mayor said, he says, "I remember sitting on the piano stool of Duke Ellington at Symphony Hall just before Mr. Ellington was about to rehearse. Tiny leaned over to me and said, 'Now you're going to hear some great music.'" I also got to see Mercer Ellington play in the Terrace Ballroom at the after-hour news Easter Monday Ball, which we're going to get to in a little bit. And he remembers shaking hands and taking a picture with presidential candidate Hubert Humphrey when Tiny hosted a fundraising picnic at Sundance Lake when Humphrey was running for president in 1968. He also said, "I remember as a child, as most of my siblings, helping to collate the magazine and as a college student, delivering after hours. Tiny believed in working as early as you could figure out the use of money. He taught me about business, making your own way, and saving your money early." So that's from Carlton.
Guy, I would say Tiny did something to motivate another young man that we do not mention tonight, do not honor, but I hope we don't wait 50 years, 20 years. Tiny, through his paper, his personality, proved that clubs and nightclubs were important. They were an outlet. You just can't go to work 8 hours, come home, watch television, fall asleep. And another young man not only saw the work that Tiny did in promoting nightclubs, but he himself became a club owner, a club operator, and that is Reuben Johnson.
Right.
Yeah.
When we think of the clubs in the city of Newark, that this young man being motivated by a Tiny Prince saying, "Hey, this is a viable business." Let's look at some of them. Cosmo, Touch of Class, Paradiso, Bogies, Highest Peak, Executive Suite, The Living Room, El Castillo, and then the last thing they opened when we had the Nevada Court Mall, a Reuben Club himself. Without a Tiny Prince showing that this is a viable business, you would not have a Reuben Johnson opening in the city of Newark over 12 clubs personally by himself. And I hope one day we'll come in this room and when he can smell the roses and see it and say, "Hey, congratulations for your interest in Newark's nightlife." Because I believe you can't be a destination city. We can't build Prudential Center. We can't build a New Jersey Performing Arts Center where one night cars were lined up all the way from South Broad Street. We had an event at Symphony Hall, an event at Prudential Center, an event at New Jersey Performing Arts, and you couldn't park downtown Newark. When they all empty out, I got one word for you. They want to go somewhere. They want to go somewhere, and Tiny Prince knew that.
Carletta, I'd like to ask you, while we're talking about some musicians, about Tiny's close relationships with some of the really bigger names in the music field, particularly in jazz in the middle part of the 20th century. Very close with Sarah Vaughan, correct?
Yes.
Could you talk a little bit about that relationship? Dinah Washington was another of the artists that he was close to.
My father loved music, and he knew a lot of these entertainers. He also had an uncle who was Danny Gibson Sr., who's also a musician, and played the clubs around in Newark. And he knew not her, Sarah Vaughan, and he said he used to take her over to. She needed to have an escort, so he used to take her over to the Apollo, and she would sing. And every time she would go over there, she would be the winner for that particular night. And this was something that he did because he just loved all kind of music, but he enjoyed Sarah Vaughan, Dinah Washington, because all these people at one time or another used to pass through the city of Newark, playing at different venues, and it's pretty much.
Barbara, you could probably add a little bit too, as some of the other people that Tiny knew in the entertainment field.
It was interesting. He knew Frank Sinatra, Irving Turner, that we hear so much about. Councilman Irving Turner was a musician. I'm sorry, was a musician. Played music, and they all hung out together. I mean, Tiny was the type of person when he walked into a room, Count Basie or Duke Ellington or Frank or Sammy Davis. He knew Sammy Davis and his brothers and fathers and everything. They used to go down to Atlantic City, the 500 Club. This was first name. Hey, Tiny. Everybody knew him. Politicians, musicians.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you next. Next to music, or maybe even more than music, he seemed to love politics.
Exactly.
Where do you think that came from?
Well, what I know is that this business of Irving Turner becoming the first black councilman in Newark, they had a group that initiated this. There was a bunch of them, and they were so successful by electing Irving that the people in New York, in Harlem, called them over to school them on how to accomplish becoming and having whatever they do over there. I don't know what they elect, councilman or something like that. But it started in Newark.
Third Ward.
And he stayed in close touch and had friendships with politicians right up through almost the end of his life.
Exactly.
Jim McGreevey being another one.
McGreevey, I had never met McGreevey, and they were all down the Robert Treat, and I said to Tiny, I said, I've never met him before. And he says, oh, he's right here. And McGreevey turned around. He says, Tiny! And I was like, nice to meet you and everything. But everybody, governors, that time, Sharpe.
Hey, come on now. I'm talking to a career politician. Look out.
Right.
But don't forget our South Side girl, not Gloria Gaynor.
That's a local girl from New York and had to come away. Gloria Gaynor.
Right.
Carletta.
Dionne Warwick, when she first started out, he had her picture on the cover. And at that time, she was just at the Key Club, appearing at the Key Club. She wasn't a big deal then. But he ran her picture on the After Hour News. Dionne Warwick.
Carletta, do you think that Tiny ever had any political aspirations of his own, or did he just like to be in that world and then maybe move to all the other worlds that he moved to?
I think my father was more of the behind the scenes type person. He would not sponsor, but he would be behind the candidate, and he would support him in various ways. And that's mostly what my father did. I don't think he really wanted to be a politician, and I don't know if he never had any desires to be a musician, but he loved politics. He loved musicians. It's just certain things that he just really enjoyed. And he loved the magazine. That was his, I guess you would call his baby. He started it, developed it, and it became what it did.
And he played an important role in Ken Gibson being elected mayor of Newark in 1970, did he not?
Yes. Quite a few different individuals who were running for various office.
But that's a good point, that
Tiny was the power behind the throne, not someone you felt threatened about. So some people have to run away from. Either they're gonna bring you bad news, or they're trying to compete with you. The beauty of Tiny was that you gravitated to him. You went to him because he would give you help. He would offer help. How can I help? How can I promote, guy? He was never threatening to anyone. That's a unique character to have. Where you're not threatening to people, but you're always sending out a vibe that I'll work with you, I'll help you, I'll be part of what you want. He's just a beautiful person. You don't. Hey, it's unique. Put it that way.
Right. I'd like to reach out into the audience if anyone has a.
Leo wants to say
Okay, Leo Johnson, please. Leo, project.
Being a musician, my business is playing the music. I meet a lot of people, and a lot of names have been mentioned up here, which I would like to say I've been in very close contact with those people, and I've even played with a lot of those people. I was offered also a seat in Duke Ellington's band, which I have a picture of me and him and Bill Doggett, and Bill Doggett on my wall, which I refused at the time because I didn't think I was ready for that. The drummer, the person, Danny Gibson, who she spoke of, is a drummer. Okay, Sarah Vaughan and I have sat many nights in the Key Club during the, it had to be in the 70s. She was at the Weequahic Towers, I think, living on the 17th floor. And the drummer, Jimmy Smith, who is Larry Young Jr.'s cousin, was living on the 16th floor, right under her. So the track record is, my track record, no offense to Tiny, I know Newark pretty well, and there's a lot of information that is is available. And as far as clubs are concerned, nobody ever mentioned the no one of us ever mentioned the front room. You remember that club?
Oh, yeah.
And that was located at 46 Broadway in Crane. One of the owner being Jose Hunt and Dorothy Gould at the time, but she later opened a place on Clinton Avenue.
Rory's? Was it Rory's on Clinton Avenue?
Between 14th,
Oh, okay.
between South 14th and 15th Street, and it was something else that came to mind.
Well, let me ask you this while you're on that subject. Talk to us a little bit about what the Newark jazz scene was in the 60s and in the 70s, because you were not just here, you were a major part of it. How many nights out did you play? Did you go see other bands? Did you,
Entertainment was 7 nights a week. Most groups played 6 nights in a matinee on Sunday. And the most popular clubs, I would say the most, the jazz club, the foremost jazz club, I would say, would be the Front Room. You could see people like Wes Montgomery, Monty Alexander, John Coltrane, Sonny Rollins, the Miles Davis Band, Miles Davis. That's when Tony Williams first came with the band, and he was at that time 17 years old. Then there's another, first it was the Cadillac Club, and that was ran by T. Hargrove and Charlie Langston, and later by Sparky J. And Sparky J brought in a lot of names. Well, speaking of the Sparky J's right now, Dorothy Donegan and people of that nature, Dizzy Gillespie, Panama Francis, Max Roach, all name acts. Betty Carter, of course. Okay, and the Key Club, which was on the opposite corner, would have people like Jimmy McGriff, Stanley Turrentine, and Sarah Vaughan, Sarah Vaughan she would always come in and she might sit in with the band and sing a song or so, but she was never a featured artist, as I recall. Sonny Stitt and people of that caliber, Lou Donaldson, so forth.
So
George Benson even.
Could a musician make a living?
At that time, yes, you could make a living playing
You could make
music.
a living playing your music.
Which later on, when it was not possible to do that, I don't think, I went back to school at 60 years old to finish 27 credits after 23 years. Got a master's at 65. And teaching at Essex County College now.
Right.
And still playing the saxophone, as you can see.
Okay. So, and let me ask you this: when are you getting your PhD?
Not
okay,
doing
you answered
that.
it. Okay, so I wanted this to be a little interactive. If anyone has a story about Tiny they'd like to tell, please feel free to get up at one of the microphones. If no one is going to jump up, I'm going to call a name out and ask that person to come forward. Just one memory for a minute or two. I know one of Tiny's best friends is here, Jimmy Perillo. Jimmy, would you come up and share a recollection of Tiny with us, please? Check your mic first, Jimmy.
Let me tell you,
Nice and loud.
Tiny Prince was a man's man and a woman's man too. I hear these stories and it brings back fond memories. I worked together with Tiny. We enjoyed our lives. He was a great man. And so many of these stories I heard and believe, and it's true. Some people talk about a man and he knew this person and that person, but Tiny really knew these people. And one of the persons that failed to be mentioned was Red Fox.
Yes.
He used to mention Red Fox to me. I said, no, you're a little old fox, not Red Fox. But anyway, so many true stories about this man. He just was a wonderful, wonderful person. We worked together in City Hall. We worked together in the Housing Authority. When we were going up to the Housing Authority from the City of Newark out to Harold Lucas and the great mayor, Sharpe James, I said, Tiny, we're going up to the Housing Authority. He said, what? I said, yeah, you're going to affirmative action, and I'm going to public relations. When? I said, soon. And we got together there. One day, the first time we went out together to do something, an assignment, and this is not a reflection because it's something I have to say that is just true. We walked on the ground, and a black man came up to us and said, hey, Tiny, what are you doing with this white man? Tiny said, wait a minute. Wait here a minute. I want to get something and bring it back to you. I said, Tiny, where you going? He said, I'm going to go get a pipe and hit this man right in his head. I said, no. He said, yeah, you're going to get it. I said, no, Tiny, don't start that. But Tiny didn't care what color,
Right.
what religion. If he was your friend, he was your friend.
Right.
And believe me, it's so heartbreaking. I do miss him because we used to really be a great, great team. All I can say is thank you for the people and his family for paying such a tribute to a great man in the city of Newark. Thank you.
Thank you, Jimmy. Let's, Barbara, let's talk a little bit about this Easter Monday ball. And maybe Carletta, you could jump in here too. How did this come about? Because this was a big deal in Newark in its day. This was the Monday after Easter at the Terrace Ballroom. There are probably some people, Walter, you remember the Easter Monday ball? Can you tell us how that came about?
Well, it was for the bartenders, the clubs. they'd either run a barmaid and bartender of the year, and this was a big deal. This was like what all the bars made sure they participated. They'd buy the long tables, and I told Guy they would come in with tabletops laden with food, liquor, fruit, all made up, and they'd carry them in and set them on top of the tables down at the terrace ballroom, and of course in their finest outfits, you know, big styling hats and the shoes, and everybody trying to outdo one another. And you'd have Count Basie, Duke Ellington, all the named people would be there. And in Count Basie's case, somebody forgot to order the piano. So Count Basie walked around the whole evening just meeting and greeting people because he couldn't play, because they didn't have the piano set up for him. That was one of the memories. But Sharpe, you remember
the free
Easter
samples
Monday.
of liquor. Hey, come on.
Right.
But Tiny had other very unique promotional ideas to help promote the magazine as well. Could you talk about some of the contests that the magazines used to get involved in?
Well, one of the we had a lot of breweries, if you recall, here in Newark. You had Rheingold, you had Schaefer Beer, Ballantine, you name it and claim it. And at one point there was a Schaefer Beer contest. Lou Perkins, Don Newcomb, and we had, I think she's here in the audience, Marcia Robinson. She was the one we were promoting with the magazine. So we would travel all over the place to get people to vote for Miss Schaefer Beer. I don't know if I want to tell the year since she's in the audience, but that was one of the promotions we used to do.
Miss Robinson, would you like to come up and share that story with the audience? By the way, did you win that contest? Is this Miss Schaefer Beer?
Well, did I win?
Yes.
According to Tiny, I won.
Okay, that's all that matters.
Tiny said it was fixed. He said, because we went out and we printed the ballots and we stuffed the boxes. You won.
Tell us how you got involved in that particular promotion, and you must have had some other dealings with Tiny as well.
What can I say about Tiny other than the fact he was a true gentleman?
Yeah.
I also worked for Tiny out of the office after the Schaefer thing. But I was dating this bartender who submitted my picture to the contest people in New York, and I became one of the finalists. And we had a campaign throughout metropolitan area, which Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, and Tiny would have his.
Go ahead, so you can say
He
it.
would have Tonto be my bodyguard. Tonto would not let anybody come within a certain radius of me. He kept the people away from me.
What about Reuben Carter? The hurricane.
Oh,
The hurricane. Remember
hurricane.
Patterson?
Yeah.
This is getting good now.
When you were in Tiny's presence, you come in contact with people from all walks of life. And one time we were, I forgot what club it was in, but
Club Babalu.
Thank you. Hurricane Carter was there, and he just came up to me and he wanted to dance with me, and he got a little too close to me, and Tiny had to put him in his place. Now here's
with the
Tiny,
left
and
hook
here's
or the right hook?
Right.
Yeah, but knowing Tiny was one of the highlights of my life. I met Tiny when I was 21 years old. I was striving to be, like most of the young ladies back then, a model. And they used to have these contests at the Terrace Ballroom in the Continental. And that's how I met Tiny. And I knew him all my adult life. And whenever I had to go someplace, he would come by my house and tell my mother, "Don't worry, we got her back." And my mother would say, "Okay, she could go." And it was just a wonderful experience.
Just out of curiosity, what did you get for winning Miss Schaefer beer?
I quit my job.
You quit your job, okay.
Because, I mean, at that time, for each appearance we made, they paid us $50 an appearance. I was making like, this is back in 62.
Okay.
I was making like $250 in appearances and sometimes more than that. So my unemployment check would go to I'd take my unemployment check down to Howard's and deposit it in my savings account.
And you only competed that 1 year?
Yes.
So you couldn't, if you couldn't go back in later, if you're Miss Schaefer for life, you couldn't compete the
No,
next
they had
year.
the contest every year.
Every year, like
they
Ryan
had
Gold
different contestants.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
Interesting, thank you.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you. So, Sharpe. Okay, here we go. Thank you.
Good evening.
Nice and loud, please.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Vivian Carter. As I shared with his daughters earlier, I was impacted immensely by the gracious demeanor of Mr. Carl Brinson, known as Tiny Prince. He was my husband's mentor. In the late 70s and 80s, under our community mayor, Sharpe James, Mr. Prince was head of the Affirmative Action Program for the city of Newark. And if you know anything about construction then and even now, back then, under Mr. Brinson's authority, Washington, D.C. came, and as the mayor knows, Newark created it was called Newark Construction Trades Training Program. My husband was the first Newarker to be inducted into that program. I shared this with his daughters earlier because throughout the years, he was like my husband's other father, protege, but often his mentor, putting him in places where he was the only English-speaking construction worker on sites and projects that were in the city of Newark. The airport, the Gateway Hotel, many of these places. So it impacted on, as a young married couple born and raised in the city of Newark, he greatly influenced my husband. He greatly influenced many other minority men and women who came through that program. And I'm sure when I shared with his daughters today, who I knew, they did not know this. And I have a picture where Washington, D.C. officials came up and with the mayor and Mr. Prince, Tiny Prince, took a picture with my husband as the first in the city of Newark to go into a construction trades program, demanding that we have representation, something we really need today. So thank you to the family.
Thank you. Thank you for that recollection, because that's exactly what my next question was going to be, but you articulated it much more eloquently than I could have. So we only have a few more minutes here before we hit the bewitching hour of 8 o'clock. Is there anyone else who'd like to share one final memory about Tiny? Because I know if no one else does, the mayor will have something to say. He does. He's got that look. I know that look.
Incidentally, you were speaking of the other two newspapers, the Nightlight, and the Nightlight was ran by James Moselle. James Moselle was an educator in the Newark school system. The After Hours was started by Mac Struthers. Mac Struthers came here originally from Pennsylvania.
Not After Hours.
Struthers was the original Nightlight. Moselle took it over. Okay, he came in from Philadelphia.
Yeah, right.
I just want
Mayor, we'll give you the last word here.
I am humbled because to see the diversity in this audience tonight, and you got the girls movie up on the hill, Latifah, You got Dunkirk, someone who served in Germany, 1960, the Berlin crisis. And we're here to salute this great man. And then you see the many faces he had. Yes, the entrepreneur, the paper, motivation. But when he was meeting with the politician and sitting with us, he would challenge us to do something for the people. How about that minority program? What are you doing to help the people? He challenged Ken Gibson. He challenged Sharpe James. Always challenged Calvin West and the other people. He would challenge us to do something. And that's why you love this guy. He never asked for anything for himself. You don't meet people like that. It wasn't about him. It was about what can we do to extend a helping hand to help someone. It was almost like what George Branch used to say. Never look down on a person unless you're going to reach down and pull them up. Tiny was always about help, always about giving, not asking. And tonight we heard a wonderful story of a man with many faces, but all of them was about love of people, love of city, and what can I give to make this a better world, a better place, a better city. We loved Tiny Prince. He was a mentor, he was a friend, he was someone you wanted to be with, and in life today, all you have is your word. Possessions don't mean nothing. They're going to come and go. Titles don't mean nothing. They're going to come and go. How many friends can you reach out there and remember that made you feel good, made you feel better? That's what Tiny did for all of us. He made us better people and feel better about ourselves and the environment in which we live. I love Tiny. He was the brother I never had.
Please thank Carletta Brinson Mitchell, Barbara Thompson, Leo Johnson, and my pal. Thank you for coming. And please, the exhibit's great, and the archives, if some of them are available now or will be at some point soon, check it out. Thanks again for coming.
Come on, get that on, come on.